Okay, call this meeting of the Port of Hood River Commission to order. Are there any modifications to the agenda from staff? That's you, Debbie.
Oh, sorry. I'm so used to being quiet. No, I'm sorry. There are no modifications from staff.
Do you guys have anything different from that?
didn't hold the court.
When we get to the consent, I do have a question on item D.
Okay,
Pretty simple one.
is there any public comment? Stephen, anybody's? You want to say anything? All right. And there's the consent. Go ahead.
On item D,
Item D, go ahead.
yeah, item D, which is the Laura Mill property. Going out for that contract. Is that contract gonna cover all of the open areas for consideration up there? Like, I call it the two slivers over there by the railroad. We're gonna look at that as well in here.
Absolutely.
Okay, and the second question is, what's the timeline on getting this done?
3 months is the performance period that the firm proposed.
Okay, so sometime this summer, we should have their
Recommendation and a follow-up presentation from said firm. With question and answer period to
Okay,
be.
thank you.
Everything looks good. Let's make a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented to the court.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
I as well, thank you. All right, a couple presentations tonight. The first one is our financial audit report.
Yes, so Tara Camp is on the line. She is on Zoom. She is the partner that's in charge of our audit from Polly Rogers. And so I am just going to turn it over to her. Before I do, Kevin did email out the annual financial report separately. So you should have gotten that in a separate email. In your packet was what we refer to as required communications from the auditors. And so that was in your packet. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Tara and let her explain kind of what she did and what she needs to communicate with you about.
Thank you, Debbie. Good evening, everybody. It's good to be here. My name is Tara Camp, and I'm a partner with Polly Rogers and Company, and we are the Port's financial statement auditor. And what I'll do this evening is go over our governing body letter, which is a nice letter that summarizes everything we're required to communicate. And then I can take any questions. So on page 1 of the letter, we cover the purpose of the audit. And our purpose for the Port is twofold. We perform the financial statement audit, and that is where we test and assess the financials created by management in order to express an opinion and determine if they're fairly stated. Secondly, we perform compliance procedures as required for all governments in Oregon under the Oregon Municipal Audit Law. And on page 2, we cover the results of the audit, and the results for the Port are excellent. For the financial statement audit, we issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. That means we gave a clean opinion with no reservations. For state minimum standards, we found no exceptions or issues requiring comment except as noted on page 52 of the report. There's a couple very minor budget items. And we issued no separate management letters, so that's excellent. Further down on page 2, we encountered no difficulties in performing and completing our audit. The Port staff and Debbie coming on did a fantastic job, and we were able to get the audit issued. We had no disagreements with management over accounting or auditing matters. There was one big new GASB standard that was implemented for June 30, 2022 called GASB 87 leases, and that definitely added a lot more work for the Port, and the Port did an excellent job on implementing that. That was a big change. And then the remainder of the letter just covers some future accounting and auditing issues coming up. GASB is always issuing new standards every year, so we want to keep you up to date on those because, again, they can create more work for the Port and will change your financial reporting here and there. So overall, excellent results, and I'd be glad to take any questions if you have any.
Actually, when I read through it, it seems like it was a pretty clean report.
She gave us some.
Good job.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. When do you audit again? Is it yearly? or
Yes.
every other year?
Our audits are conducted yearly, and the fiscal year, and as you know, is June 30, 2023 for the current audit. So we'll get started on that soon.
They've actually been sending communication to get started. They're going to do what they call interim procedures. They're going to do that in May.
So as we move into this operational concept,
Mhm.
is that going to change the way you need to audit?
No,
Okay,
it will not.
okay, good. Thank you.
Okay,
All right. You can just keep on going.
okay, I'm
Good job.
gonna keep on going. Thank you, Tara.
All right, thank you. Have a good evening.
Yes, you too. So the next item is what I'm referring to as operational center analysis. We'll probably change the name a million times, but some of this information has been presented to the commission in the past in kind of a different format. And what we were attempting to do was to take the information in our financial system and in our annual report is lumped together. So we have the revenue fund, which is where all of our industrial properties, commercial properties, the waterfront, the bridge, everything is in that one fund. And so we're trying to take it and break it out so that we can look at individual pieces of it a little more and apply some performance standards basically to those individual pieces, and to determine where tolls are backfilling deficits in those areas. So the first stab that we took at it took to look at this, Kevin really wanted to focus on fiscal year 22 because it has been audited and we had some solid numbers that we could tie things out to. So we kind of took a past look, but what we want to do now is begin to roll this forward. So we took fiscal year 22. The first stab I took at it was to kind of present it the way that your information has been presented in the past. So that first schedule in your packet had it broken out with the marina, the airport, waterfront recreation, commercial property, industrial property. The waterfront industrial, which is lot 1 and 900, and is really the only revenue at this point is parking revenue. And then the bridge operations. And then lump in with the bridge operations, kind of pull in the other bridge activities into that. So this first schedule took that into account. The other thing I wanted to do with the information was to kind of show how tolls were spent. And it's always difficult when you take just 1 year, because this year there wasn't a lot of capital outlay in the port. There wasn't a lot of things that can fluctuate from year to year. So I wanted to take that pie chart that was in your packet and show how toll revenues were spent in fiscal year 2022, or how they were allocated. Because that's going to be going forward. That's one of our big discussions going forward is how tolls are allocated. Then in your packet, Commissioner Fox came up with his what he called the Budget and Port Management Strategic Plan document, which actually had a lot of similarities to what Kevin and I were already working on. He took that and made some proposals about taking some reserves. So the port had, at the end of fiscal year 22, had about $14 million in unrestricted or unconstrained money that could be used for things, you know, kind of at the port's discretion, if you will. And so he took that and started beginning to look at a way to allocate that among the existing cost centers or operational centers. And he can speak more to that document. And then, but then what I did, because he had a different way of lumping together the port properties, the individual properties. So I took a second stab at that, that schedule and lumped things together the way that he had proposed to lump them together. So it gives you kind of a couple of ways of looking at things. And none of these are set in stone. So, you know, on April 4th, we're going to have the big planning meeting. And at that time, we'll start looking at how these numbers look going forward and what does that mean? If we, you know, how we group them, who's going to subsidize who? You know, the event site is a recreational property. It's probably never going to pay for itself. So if we're going to continue to operate the event site, we have to determine how are we going to pay for that? Because it does have a deficit each year. So there's those things that moving forward, we have to look at and be intentional about how we want to backfill those properties that either don't pay for themselves or don't necessarily pay for themselves on an ongoing basis. That may, for example, the airport right now is in a pretty good spot of pretty much coming close to breaking even operationally. But then as soon as you start talking about how to fund capital outlay and other unusual things that might happen, you know, those one-offs, as we sometimes call them, there isn't a dedicated funding source for those one-offs. So those are the kinds of things that we'll need to look at going forward. And on April 4th, I want to have some good forecasting tools. And I've already been working with Greg on some of them. And to be able to look at that and say, you know, over time, is this property sustaining itself, or over time, does this property need some subsidy from somewhere to make it operational or make it sustainable? So that was my goal in these with these schedules, or whatever you want to call them, charts and schedules. So I wanted to present them to start some discussion around that and get some direction for April 4th. That was my goal.
So what I did with my sheets, I took a look at the operating centers that we basically have now. And I grouped two together. I took the industrial, port industrial area and added the recreational area to it. Because I knew the recreational area is not a moneymaker, it's a money user. But the industrial port area generates revenue for us. So if you hook those two together, that makes a kind of a self-contained unit. It's down at the port. You could manage it kind of together. Then I said the rest of them, probably keep them separate. So you have the airport separate, you have the marina separate, you have the industrial zone up at Odell separate. You would have two other areas, the current bridge, maintenance and repair. And then lastly, there would be a new one called the bridge replacement fund, if you will. So the concept here says you have a reserve for each of those operating centers, and the reserve is initially populated out of that $14 million super reserve for the port. But once that is funded, then the intent is no more funds move into that from the bridge, and you have to pace development within the operating center. So you maintain fiscal control based on your reserves. And could you show that one slide? So while she's bringing that up, the reserve on page 3 or 231, I'm suggesting is that this year and next year, we create a reserve for the airport totaling $2 million. $1 million this year, $1 million next year. The current bridge is the balance. So that's whatever is left over. You start this year or 22 with 14 million. And once we take out all of this other, it leaves about 7 million there. But every year it's going to grow with tolls and so on. So it'll replenish a lot faster than anything else. So the marina, I suggest that we create a reserve of $1 million, $500,000 this year, $500,000 next year. Commercial port and recreational area, that's where we've got, of course, lot 900, lot 100. It's the biggest area to develop going forward. I suggested 2 million this year, 2 million next year, total reserve of $4 million, which means we're going to have to look at PPP. We're going to have to look at grants. We're going to have to look at alternate financing if we want to do something down there. And I made a recommendation here out of the 4 million. Don't let your reserve get below $500,000 at any given year.
Are these all numbers that you have? You have that document?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it possible for April 4th for you to look at those numbers
Sure.
and bring back ideas? Because I mean, I might not like the idea of 2 million reserve at the airport, 'cause you can't make any money off of that. But bring back a recommendation, a financial recommendation from staff as part of that, because I like the idea of tracking where the tolls go, tracking, to help us get off of them. Some will be sooner than like
Yeah.
others.
Yeah.
And tracking all that, fine. Is that possible to use that and come back with a recommendation
Yes,
of how that could work for staff? Because I'm assuming some of that you already do.
yes,
So this report up here is the same report that you got in your package that you just presented. But we added oh boy. Can you get rid of that? Or can you slide this up a little bit?
Yeah.
There you go. Okay, so the reserves that are on that sheet are the reserves in these boxes. Okay, for each of these operating centers. So what these three areas are is overheads and general support. And Debbie has taken all of those and prorated them back over these various accounts in a manner. So an updated expenditure, instead of 354, it's 360. So if you compare that, the updated change in fund balance. In the case of the marina, we made $48,000 this year to the positive. In the case of the airport, we were 126,000 in the negative. The commercial waterfront plus the recreational, we were actually 249,000 positive. If we wouldn't have had our other little problem down there, that would have been $500,000. Okay, and then 14,000 on the Odell property and so on, as you see here. So if you look at the reserves that we're suggesting in that sheet, in this particular case, if this was the real year, that reserve would grow by 48,000 net. This reserve would be used 126,000 in the negative, so it would reduce it. This one would grow by $250,000. This would grow a little bit. And then here's the remainder of the bridge fund. So it would grow by $1.7 million on top of that. And then over here, there's a new one, the bridge repair and replacement fund. This is funded out of any new tolls for 2023 and beyond. And then, so the bridge repair and replacement fund started out at 14.5. Once we're all finished with it, it would be sitting at 7 plus 1 point. So it'd be pretty close to $9 million after we fully funded all of these. So that's the way it kind of works. Then I would recommend that as you set up the system, we can see this by operating center by year. So as you look at your projects out in the future, you can schedule your projects and predict what's going to happen to this reserve fund. Is it going to draw down? How fast are you going to replenish it back up as that new project comes online, starts generating some revenue? So that's something we haven't been able to do in the past. The other thing about this concept, I believe, we should have a project manager over each of these areas. And their responsibility is profit and loss for that area. So we help judge their performance on what's happening to the reserve over the long period of time. Are we holding the reserve and we're growing revenue? And we're balanced growing revenue with developing of the property that generates more revenue. So we'll have that ability to see for the first time and then hold somebody accountable to it. That's kind of the concept and the idea behind this, which is really new for us at the court. But it's kind of, I think it's kind of exciting for our project managers. This is something that it's a perfect breeding ground for future business leaders. They've got total, profit and loss.
And what you're looking for tonight is our okay to have staff look into this model as part of our April 4th discussion.
What I would like to suggest that we vote on is that the general concept that we establish operating center reserves and get away from one big reserve. And we fund it over the next 2 years, could be 3 years. That really shows the public that we're weaning ourselves off the bridge tolls. It still gives you some capability in the document that if something catastrophic happens, we can borrow from this to fix something over here, but we want to pay it back.
Yeah, conceptually, I don't have any problem with that. I'd like to see what staff comes up with. I don't think voting on specifically anything would be very smart without staff looking into it first, as far as, oh, we're going to use all 2023 tolls starting now to go into a bridge replacement. Maybe that works perfectly. They haven't had time to look into that, and that's what April 4th is about, is policy on that one. So I think that would be premature, but as far as being ready and be conceptually okay with this, I think that's fine.
Could I ask the question? Because I know I've talked to Kevin about this and I know I've spent time with Debbie. Do you feel comfortable with the principle and the concept behind the paper? Not so much, is it $1 million or should it be $1.5 million or should it be 2 million? But are you comfortable with the concept of segregating, the pots and managing it separately? What I'm after is I'm trying to get approval and concept that I can take back to the bi-state. And I believe in principle, if we can get agreement on this, I can get the bi-state to go ahead and go sign off on the CFAs.
I think we're saying the same
Get that
thing.
thing going.
We're saying the same thing.
I'm sorry?
We're saying the same thing,
Okay,
because there's no numbers attached to it
yeah,
or times, but we're saying the same thing.
okay.
I'm
Timeline seems to be different tonight and April 4th.
I am fine conceptually saying, I like this idea. I want staff to look at it and be ready to talk about it April 4th. As far as voting on any actual numbers or times, I don't think that's appropriate tonight. I don't know.
Mike, does that help your
And
situation?
I'm
with
fine with
bi-state?
that. I'm after the concept and the principle, and it generally gives you a path forward that says, okay, here's how we can wean ourselves off the bridge, but still remain in control. In fact, I think it gives us more control than where we were.
Just concerned about a concept being. the
Staff can
action.
come back.
Yeah.
By concept, I mean, look into it. If they come back on April 4th and say, here's absolutely why you don't want to do that, we have to be open to that. I don't see why that would happen, but
That's what-
conceptually, I like the idea of being able to track by department. It will give a much clearer picture of where tolls are going and where they can stop going sooner. I
but
don't mind that.
Would a directive work, a directive from the commission to staff to move forward with this concept? Would that satisfy what you're looking for, Commissioner Fox?
I think so.
That could just be a consensus, but sure.
Yeah, I just, April 4th is designed perfectly for this situation, these kind of topics.
Right.
That's why we had April 4th.
Exactly.
Yeah, and give staff time.
What this goes into, I think, is direction to the staff for April 4th to start thinking about how would you group your projects and how fast could you develop them under this type of a concept? And part of that budgeting process may say, hey, if we made this, I'm gonna make a guess, if we made that 2 million, we could quickly expedite certain projects that would generate revenue quicker and help us bottom line. But the concept of accountability and separate reserve pots, and once we've established a reserve pot, it's difficult to change that. So we're holding people accountable.
Don't you want staff to have time to identify those potential projects that would be revenue generated?
I don't, because first off, that's gonna change over the next 20 years. It's gonna evolve, it's gonna grow. Whatever we do in April, I guarantee a year from now, it's gonna be different. But the guiding principles shouldn't change. That we're gonna be holding ourselves accountable by an operating center. And we're gonna have to balance expenditures and revenue with reserves for each operating center.
That's simple.
It's that simple.
That's simple. Yeah. Kevin's, he's not here.
Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that, and
That gives you
actually, this was started out initially as the original schedule here that you see started out as
Yeah.
Kevin's idea. So he's fine with this concept.
So.
I mean, we
let's-
don't know what the final numbers are gonna look
Right,
like.
Right, and that's why I don't think that's appropriate
So-
tonight, but that's not what Mike's asking
Nope.
about, and
Right,
you're gonna tell us what that is and how that is and when, and if that works.
yes,
As staff, it would be appreciated if we could take a better look at what those operating centers exist as.
Yep.
Because the groupings of Odell versus our waterfront, we're forgetting about our downtown. We have a lot more real estate, and so separating that out and also grouping the waterfront, which is a losing endeavor with real estate. It makes it difficult as an area manager per se, that I've always got a lost leader in my grouping. And so having a better look at how we could break that out as far as grouping in, because I have depreciation in my assets that I have to deal with. So I might have a revenue positive scenario. I've got to make sure I can afford those new HVAC systems, those new roofs. And so already having the waterfront lumped in there as something that I have to consider, it's a bit of it's disingenuous to the real estate as an asset or as a revenue component.
It just makes that project manager's job a lot easier. I think. Well,
Well,
actually,
if
no,
you're-
it
if you're
hits
tracking-
him with a,
Yeah, I didn't say much.
yeah.
You're shackling me from the start.
so if
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
can
but it's
interject,
relatively small compared to the revenue source that you've got there.
Well, if it's losing 500,000 and I'm gaining 880,000, it's not that.
so this is the discussion I want to have on April 4th,
Correct.
because we're
Yeah.
looking at the individual properties. It is where, that is where Greg and I are starting, is we're looking at the individual, what does Jensen need? What does Halyard need? All of that.
And
So we're
I'm
starting
fine with
there.
that. I
So-
think that's fine. It
Okay.
doesn't preclude using the concept.
Right.
It's A and A go here, B and C
Yeah.
go here. That's fine. I would also encourage, as you're looking at your properties, ask some question about. My favorite one is that property adjacent to Indian Creek Trail. We've got a slice there that we're never gonna get any money from. We're never gonna develop it. Why don't we give it away? Just get rid of it. We're spending money on it. We're not getting anything from it.
I totally agree, and I almost think that all of those parcels that are gonna be a loss should be grouped together almost, because then we can come up with strategies of how to accommodate those or divest of them. But if you lump it in with something, then it's locked in with that real estate component. And so if we're gonna, again, I think April 4th is gonna be a very telling session. We're gonna have some better numbers thanks to Debbie's work. And I think we'll be able to sharpen this concept to something that's usable.
What do you think, Arthur? I'm gonna ask the public. Are you okay with this?
I don't think that my opinion on this matters. I don't think that's appropriate for me to.
Okay,
Your
thank you.
discussion. I want to hear your numbers and I look forward to the April discussion.
Very professional, thank you.
Good enough? Right, thank you.
Thank
Look
you.
forward to that discussion. Michael, last one. Washington State Transportation Commission replacement
Sorry,
bridge traffic and revenue study presentation.
Yeah, so Carl C. Is the deputy director for the Washington State Transportation Commission. He has given a couple presentations now in the last month. He had a presentation that he did for the Bi-State Working Group prior to doing a presentation for the Transportation Commission on the toll revenue study that Washington Legislature funded and that they're leading. And he's here this evening to update the Port Commission on where they are and the two scenarios that they have. And then kind of what the rest of their schedule looks like. So, and then for any questions that you may have related to what they're developing and what they're putting together. So, Carl, go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. Thank you for the opportunity to present today to the Porterfoot River Commission. It's been great to meet with the Bi-State Working Group and Commissioner Fox over the past several months, and as we help bring forward this project ultimately, and to keep you informed of where we're going with that with the commission. Is it okay if I share my screen and go ahead with the presentation?
Yeah, you're good. Go ahead, Carl.
Okay. I will do.
And while he's doing that, we also have Carrie Witt, who has been running a parallel study for the Bi-State Working Group. If there's any questions, he's also available to answer questions.
Let me just flip this around because I think I'm on the wrong.
Yeah, we're seeing the two screens.
Here it is. Okay, 1 second. There it is. Well, thanks again. As Michael said, I'm Carl C., Deputy Director for the Washington State Transportation Commission. We, as a point of background, we are the tolling authority in the state of Washington, in addition to setting ferry fares and overseeing statewide transportation policy or setting statewide transportation policy, such as with the Washington State Transportation Plan. We have a commission of 7 members and staff of 6, so somewhat familiar with the commission setup. But in this capacity, we were charged by our legislature to move forward with this analysis, and I'll get a little bit more into those details in a moment here. So overall, as Michael referenced, I'm here to provide you an update or overview of the study purpose and the status, as well as to provide a preliminary review the preliminary tolling scenarios that we have put forward, and then finally to give provide you an update on the preliminary commission direction on the 2 final scenarios. So in this past year in 2022, the Washington State Legislature directed the commission to undertake this traffic and revenue study to carry out a undertake this plan level traffic and revenue study to be completed by June 30th of this year. The primary goal is to develop a plan level traffic and revenue analysis to result in a toll funding capacity analysis for the legislature that supports future funding decisions for the Hood River Bridge replacement project. It was also directed that it should inform an investment grade traffic and revenue study, or I should say, we wanted that to be part of this because we know that the next step for the bridge authority that will be in place will be to conduct an investment grade plan level traffic and revenue study ahead of any financing. Something we're always trying to be clear that this is separate from the work that Kerry and his team is leading up for your current rate setting for fiscal year 24. So know that we're trying to help make that distinction as we talk about this project as well. Overall, our project, as in terms of our schedule, we started in August of 2022 when we brought on our team from CDM Smith for our consultants. And we've been working from that time forward to first assess the data, collect the data and assess it, and then develop some scenarios that I'll speak to here in a moment, some preliminary scenarios that we worked bringing forward for analysis, and now finally developing these final 2 scenarios and some initial analysis that will then result. What I have here is overall showing where we're at, what we've been moving forward with this past month, or the preliminary TNR forecast scenarios, of course. And then we'll be back in front of our full commission in April briefly, but more coming back in May with the full analysis of the 2 scenarios and presenting them the final report, so we can then finalize it in June. Speaking to the preliminary tolling scenarios, the overall process for developing our tolling scenarios for this study, we started in late fall, early winter, on developing what some scenarios could be to put forward for further analysis. And ultimately, we developed 8 tolling preliminary scenarios that the commission approved in January of this year, and moved that forward for preliminary forecast analysis that the commission then reviewed in terms of the results in this past March, the commission meeting this past week, I guess, and on March 14th. In addition to the results of those preliminary scenarios, we did review and advance 2 scenarios for preliminary consideration that we will then finalize in April. While undertaking the analysis of the final 2 scenarios, there will also be 2 additional sensitivity tests that we plan to undertake. One around what it might look like to have a low income program in place. Another that would look at the potential of a frequency user program. So 2 ways to address providing some discounts to those who use the bridge frequently, or those who are most in need of discounts in the community. So before I'll touch on what those preliminary scenarios were here in a moment, but just to give some overview first, when we're developing these preliminary scenarios, we put together some assumptions that would help us understand what would change and not change compared to current toll rates. And some examples of that are that these preliminary scenarios assume the current actual toll multipliers that are currently in place, so for trucks of multiple axles, and also assume the current toll-free exemptions and agreements in place, such as for transit and for tribal agreements. Importantly, some other considerations that we did take a look at but did not advance was that around, say, traffic data did not support the need for time of day, day of week, or seasonal pricing. We took a look at all that, and the data did not indicate a need to consider applying that type of variation within any tolling schedule going forward. And then the reference, as I referenced before, looking at low income or high frequency discount plans was something that we will want to advance, not as a scenario, but a more limited analysis with that sensitivity testing for the final 2 scenarios that we do advance. Speaking then to the scenarios that we advanced for a preliminary discussion, the 8 scenarios, we incorporated some pre-completion assumptions from that we discussed with the Bi-State Working Group and staff from late last year. So I know these are scenarios, effectively options for pre-completion tolling that have changed, and we'll touch on that in a moment. But at that point, we wanted to look at 4 options that were, well, 3 options that were a potential consideration, and 1, the no change as a baseline. So we looked at a no change, maintaining the $1 and $2 cash, $1 breeze buy and $2 cash and credit rate. And then looking at a 100% increase in FY24, or a 25-cent annual increase in cash and credit breeze buy through FY27, and finally a 50-cent annual increase for cash and credit and 25-cent increase for breeze buy through FY30. We then applied some two escalation options for post-completion analysis for FY 31 through FY 51. And that's looking at either a 2.5% annual increase or a 15% increase every 5 years, starting in either FY 31 or 36, depending on the scenario. Finally, we considered the differential between the breeze-by rate and what would be the video rate, assuming you have all electric tolling going forward. And we applied the escalation to both those rates on all the scenarios except for 2A and 2B, where we applied a $2 differential for going forward, which is similar to how we do it, which is how we do it here in Washington State. So we want to have some comparison of what those effects would be, and just to make sure we're advancing two ways to approach that differential going forward. As you can see, there was a large range of resulting toll rates, and I can speak here in a moment to some of the results we saw from those range of rates. So some analysis that resulted from those preliminary toll scenarios. Though the rates ranged a great deal, the resulting toll transactions are very, very similar. As you can effectively see, they overlap each other entirely for once the bridge is open. And the reasoning for that is that the distance to go take an alternative route is so long that the value of time really didn't change. The willingness of someone to take that bridge, despite the range of toll rates, did not change for each of those different options. So effectively, we see the same result in terms of annual toll transactions moving forward. The growth rate that is displayed here is about 2.4% during the pre-completion tolling, and about 1.1% afterwards. So there is some effect there perhaps from the higher toll rates in general. Historically, we don't show going too far back there before COVID, but historically going back to 2002, say 2002 to 2019, historic growth rate was about 2.3%, and more kind of tighter timeline between 2011 and 2019, the annual growth rate was about 2.5%. So we see the 1.1% growth rate going forward as pretty effective, appropriately lower than what we've seen with the lower toll rate amounts, but still growing over time. I should also note that we do expect breeze-by transactions, so the share of total transactions that are breeze-by to, which has been historically has been about 75%, to increase to about 83% by the 2031 when the bridge opens, and to continue to increase up to 90% by 2060. Certainly a long ways off when we think about 2060, a lot of changes, but that's where we see the growth taking place. So how does that translate into revenues? And I'll have a couple of charts here to help with that. This chart shows the annual adjusted toll revenue after cost to collect. So the cost to collect is rather consistent for each of the scenarios, though there is that doesn't account for there's greater leakage for when we have video toll rates. For the higher the toll rates, the more tolls that are not necessarily collected, because you have more revenues not necessarily collected because you're charging more per transaction. But the main point here is that there is, despite the similar transaction levels, you do see the range in adjusted toll revenues that result for paying facility O&M, R&R, and debt service going forward. I'll pause there. Is there any questions from anybody to touch on that initial analysis? Okay, happy to come back to that if there is. With that information in hand, we put together a financial capacity analysis to understand how much of the total bridge costs could be paid by each of these scenarios. We wanted to ensure we had some strong assumptions in place. So first, well, we broke it out as follows. First, we looked at it as either with bonding, debt service backed by bonding, or with federal TIFIA loan. And as you can see, we broke out those three areas that we take a look at there. The debt structure, such as how much you need to pay per year and for how long are you paying that debt service, the debt service interest rates, as well as the required debt service coverage ratio. So how much do you need to be generating more than debt service in order to meet their financial requirements on an annual basis. And in each of those cases, the federal TIFIA loan, as you may well be aware, is more favorable. And just we're laying out the comparison here. We do understand that the TIFIA loan is something that is the likely approach and seems viable. So you'll note that as we go forward in the final two scenarios, we're assuming that the TIFIA loans will be the approach taken for financing the facility. So overall, from those preliminary scenarios, what we saw is documented here in terms of how much of those capital costs could you expect to raise at the toll rates that are identified with those preliminary scenarios. Just some highlights here. 1A and 1B, of course, is a no change toll rate. So as a result, we would not expect to see any of that capacity covered. But when we get down to options 2A and 3A, for example, for TIFIA loans, or 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B, we're getting into that bottom range of what's been identified at least by the Bi-State Working Group as what's being sought from tolling of between $75 and $125 million. And then 4A and 4B provided upwards of $140 million through the federal TIFIA loan, if that's the financing approach. These are kind of a point in time, I would say, assessment. Our financial capacity analysis would certainly point out that interest rates can vary over time and different requirements may change, but this is what we're seeing here from the initial analysis. Certainly the bonding, this also points to that the TIFIA loans are certainly more favorable approach for going forward for meeting those targets for the facility. That brings us to the final two scenarios. As I referenced last week, the tolling commission, the Washington State Transportation Commission did advance give preliminary direction on two final scenarios for us to start some analysis on. We'll come back to them in April for final approval of those two scenarios. And then analysis will be completed and incorporated into the final report that we'll present the results of in May, and then the final documentation in June. So what I have here is that initial direction. No, it could change, though I think we're in a good place on much of this direction. We'd asked them to provide feedback around 4 areas to help inform these two final tolling scenarios. One around funding and financing needs. So looking to what the direction we had asked for was what should the financial targets be for these scenarios of the final two scenarios. And where the direction the commission has provided at this point is to advance bookend scenarios that reflect the minimum and maximum tolling funding range targeted by the Bi-State Working Group of between $75 million and $125 million. This was consistent with the feedback we had heard from the Bi-State Working Group. So feel that does align with where the Bi-State Working Group is as well. Next, we wanted some feedback to understand if we should continue to look at how we should look at that breeze by video rate differential I referenced with the preliminary toll rates. The direction we have at this point is to apply the $2 differential to one scenario, scenario A, with a $75 million target, and to apply the escalation to both the breeze by and video rates for scenario B to reach the $125 million target. And I'll show you some of that results here in the next slide. But the interest there is to advance both those approaches in order to help keep that discussion going, such as for looking ahead to the investment grade study to understand whether you want to keep a $2 differential or consider some of the trade-offs of having that escalation in place for both those toll collection types. Next, regarding pre-completion toll rates, based on feedback from the Bi-State Working Group, we understand there's a consensus or a preference moving towards two scenarios that are under consideration for these pre-completion rates around scenario 3 and scenario 5. And that being the case, the preliminary direction is to apply scenario 3 to one scenario, scenario A, and scenario 5 to the other scenario, scenario B. Again, to help advance further consideration of both those two approaches to the pre-completion toll rates. And finally, the toll rate increases. Some people, we saw feedback on the toll rate increases and escalation approach. In this case, for both scenarios, we're applying the periodic escalation of 15% every 5 years. This again was consistent with feedback we had from the Bi-State Working Group on a preference to have periodic rate increases as opposed to annual rate increases. Really, it could be done either way, but this is we're looking at applying this to these approaches at the time being. Those increases would start in FY36, in part because you'll see there's also an assumption of a rate increase taking effect upon the opening of the bridge as a point in time where there's clear value being provided to customers, new value for drivers of the facility. And so if there's a need to increase toll rates, doing it when the new bridge opens does provide some you can definitely see the value as you use that facility at that point in time. And also supports having those revenues raised, those higher revenues coming in for the moment that bridge is open. So my last slide, and I'm happy to address questions on any of it, but is to bring that together and show you where those scenarios, what the resulting scenarios being proposed do look like. The table here shows on top, of course, the existing toll rates of $1 and $2. And then as we move down to the pre-completion, you can see the application of Bi-State Working Group scenario 3 for the commission's scenario A, with the 75% increase for breeze by and $1.50 for cash in FY24, and maintaining that through FY30. And then for scenario B for the pre-completion, starting with a $1 increase for both breeze by and cash in FY24, and advancing that and keep maintaining that through FY30. As we shift to post-completion, as referenced, we'll apply the 15% increase every 5 years, starting in FY36 for both scenarios. But for scenario A, that escalation will only be in effect for the breeze by payment options, with a $2 differential maintained between breeze by and video as those breeze by rates increase, as opposed to scenario B, where that escalation will be in effect for both payment options. So in sum, that brings us to one scenario that is estimated that we intend to have, it's a target reaching a $75 million financial capacity, and the other reaching the $125 million financial capacity. We are doing some further work to ensure that the rates we have here do meet that capacity, and ahead of the April commission meeting, we'll make any adjustments if needed to reflect what toll rates might need to be, if they need to be bumped up at all to support meeting those targets. We'll advance that. But right now, this is where we're at with those scenarios.
So Carl, this is Commissioner Fox. Let me jump in here on this particular slide.
Sure.
So there's three things that we need to be aware of as we go through this whole process right now. Number one is, how much do we need to increase the tolls today to create a revenue reserve that would allow us to qualify for a TIFIA loan of somewhere between 75 and $125 million. That's somewhere in the neighborhood of $15 million, plus or minus a little bit. That's conservative. Then we also need to create a little bit of a reserve to operate the bridge for the first year. And we think that's somewhere close in total to about $21 million. What we've done through Kerry's work and validated with Carl's work, if you look at the top two lines, 24 and 30, those rates, both of them support the $21 million. So we could either select scenario A to implement this summer or select scenario B this summer. And we're pretty well assured that by the time the new bridge is open, we will have enough reserves that we can qualify for TIFIA loans and get the operation going properly. That's one thing. The second thing is you want to make sure that your revenue stream post new bridge is sufficient to pay back a TIFIA loan and to operate the bridge. So one of the things we're looking at is we want to make sure that there's not a huge jump when the bridge opens up in tolls. We don't want it to go from $2 to $7 to be able to afford the loan. Well, we've got to check here that either scenario A or B at the time of the new bridge opening will support, I see, $125 million.
That's,
Which is probably closer to what we're going to need than the 75 million.
so I just want to make one clarification on
go ahead.
that. Scenario A only supports a 75 million from 31 to 51. Scenario B supports 125. So you can choose either scenario under 24 to 30 to get to your reserve amount.
Which TIFIA loan do you need? Do you need a $75
Well,
million loan or 125?
We do
don't
not
know.
know right now, and that's
I
why
don't know, it's probably-
we're only doing enough to get us to the reserves. Because between now and the opening of the bridge, we'll know more about the federal, we'll know more about the state, and then we can make a determination of, do we need to go with scenario A from 31 to 51, or do we need to go with scenario B from 31 to 51? And then that's when we will lock in the TIFIA loan of that amount.
Right.
But I just want to make sure you only get 75 million if you do A, you only get 125 if you do B.
So the beauty of this is what we have to decide now is 24 to 30. Either one of them will position us fine for the reserve. Once we put the new authority in place and we continue with fine tuning the study, we then, and everything else we're going to know, then we're going to have to make a decision on the lower half of that chart. When we open the bridge and we start doing revenue, what are we going to have to take it to? And more than likely, it'll be a little different than what's here. This is just kind of standing in.
These numbers make sense, and reading this makes sense. I understand the need, what we're going for. One question, why not a bigger, and Carl, this might be for you, why not a bigger disparity between Breeze By and Cash? And I ask that because Breeze By being 75% of our model or of our traffic.
Yeah.
My assumption is, and there's no data to support this, but my assumption is going to be on the cash side, we're capturing the majority of the tourist out of town dollar. On that cash side, why not a greater disparity? It's
that could always,
percent, but
yeah, and that could always be looking at. You can always look at that. for us, where we start, $2 came from the differential that we have in place across toll facilities in Washington State. That are operated by WashDOT and that the commission sets toll rates for. And that amount is roughly the additional cost, additional cost of collecting those rates compared to a transponder toll, from just the initial equipment and the processing that's involved. Now that might vary, especially as you get closer to the opening of the bridge and understand your cost, what your cost might be going forward. You might say that differential should be $3 just to cover those costs, and or you might say that $2 plus you want to have some additional amount, like as you say, to have more of that burden on the those who are not the local payers. We kind of addressed that with the option to escalate both video and breeze by. And that's where we get, you notice by, in FY 31, it's only a $2.50 differential that grows to over $4 by FY 50. And so that's where one reason we left both those options in order to help show if you do want to shift some of that burden to those who are not paying it every day, to those who are traveling through, then you could consider that either a larger differential that's set or this approach of escalating both those types of payments.
Let me just jump in here too and just say that's why we refer to these, that you don't have to choose scenario A or scenario B. These are what we call bookends, right? So scenario A is the low end that would get you the financing capacity you need after 2031. Scenario B is the high end that might get you 125 million in the after 2031 tolling. In between those two, you can do anything you want and any combination that you want. And when that time comes, the new bi-state commission may instruct HNTV, CDM Smith, whomever, to analyze a whole new group of tolling scenarios. The important thing for this, for Port of Hood River today, is that either of these two pre-completion scenarios, ignore the bottom part of this chart, will get you the reserves that you need to put you in a position to be free to make those decisions in 2030.
Is it possible that there will be a need for $125 million ticket loan or not?
Yes, there
Then
is.
you plan for that, right?
Right, and that's, yeah.
Well, that's why what I like tonight is that A or B above the line positions you well for the 125.
Well, it sounds like only B does. It sounds like A positions you for 75.
B only does after 31. Either scenario up front gets you to the 21 million. What you do after will get you the ability to repay.
Okay, and that's a
To say that,
That's a
decision.
Yeah, that's a
right
decision
here.
that doesn't have to be made for 7 or 8 years.
Well, and the port will not be making that
And the port would
decision.
be-
The port won't be
Yeah,
making
The
that decision.
bi-state authority will
The
be
second
making that,
question will be done by that.
correct.
Right.
So we.
If I could
talked
add to
in the
that.
Bi-state, we talked in the bi-state about which scenario should we select or recommend to the port for the 24 to opening. And either one will work, as I said. There's some that think the $2 option is better than the 175. Some think the 175 shows that it's a little cheaper for the locals going across. Where we left it with the bi-state is that we need to work with the port to do a timeline coming back that says, okay, when do we, if we want to do this increase this summer, when do we have to make the call? So what are the steps? And I know Mike and company have been working with Genevieve on a timeline.
Yeah, we need, from the time the decision is made to we are going to implement this increase, you need minimum 6 months to get the proper process through the public to know, we would recommend. Now, you could do what you want. You have the authority to go say, do it tomorrow and not do anything. Based on past and how it's been done, you need about 6 months to do what you've done in the past to communicate that to the public.
But
Well, and there is
that
a minimum of a
is-
couple of months at least, because
Yeah.
there is programming to be done within the toll system.
That's right.
And
So, yeah, even if
those
you
kinds
said
of
you
things.
want to do it immediately, you have to go get signs, you have to reprogram the tolling, you got to set up the new algorithms within all that. So there's a delay in there from the time the decision's made till you'll be able to actually implement. So the importance is we really need to do something this year.
Well, we'll just
To
need a
get the
recommendation
process
of
started.
what and on what time frame, and then you'll know. In this long, we'll have that reserve that we need.
Well,
These
this
are
assumes that we make the decision and this summer, July or August, we start collecting the tolls.
Which means you have to make a decision
Right
relatively
now.
quickly.
Exactly. Yeah, we need to, I mean, it's one of, time's money, right? I mean,
And so when do we expect that recommendation to come?
Well, what we promised the bi-state is that we would put this little schedule together. That says, here are the steps that the port has to take
mhm.
to implement a toll increase. So I think we've got to work with Genevieve. She's already got it.
We
We just
have
gotta
it.
get it on a piece of
Yeah,
paper.
we have it. I mean,
We
we,
bring it to the next bi-state working group and we answer that.
Yep.
Then I think we've got to try and force a discussion or a decision. Is it A or B? We know it's
Yeah.
gonna be A or B. I don't. From what I heard from the bi-state, there's no issue that we want it to be C. We're now down to A or B. But we got to make the decision A or B. And
Yeah.
so
we'll expect to see that when you have it relatively soon.
yeah, we have another our next meeting is the 3rd. I think it's 3rd or 4th,
It's the third.
whatever the
Your
Monday is
third.
it the 3rd? Okay.
That's a Monday.
So, yeah, so I think coming out of, well, he's in the public, I think coming out of that meeting, we should be able to make a recommendation.
And that'll come with timeframes, recommendations for discussion with the public. enough
Yeah, we
time
could give you,
to-
yeah, we could
Okay.
probably provide the time frame even before then, because we've got a schedule laid out of the events. I mean, Genevieve went back and looked at the historical process and she's got that laid out of,
Correct.
here's how we've done it in the past. I think there was one question about whether we did one meeting or two, that we could shorten that time frame maybe a little bit, but that was really the only thing that, yeah.
Does he have more? Than-
Um,
No.
I don't think so. I think it was just if you had any other questions
Okay.
of him.
Anybody else have a question? Okay. I think we're good.
I'll just make one, if I can make one more point, and I think this, just to build on what you're saying, not to, when I think this chart, maybe Carrie, if you could work with me on this chart might be better if I put a line after FY 30 to show how much is expected to be generated by those pre-completion tolls.
Yeah.
Because the 75 to 125 is completely generated between FY 31 and 50.
Yeah, that would help, Carl.
So,
And we can,
Okay.
yeah, and Carl, our model spits those numbers out, so we can get you the correct numbers, and I think that would be a useful,
Yeah.
useful
Okay.
tool, and they're very similar, quite frankly. They generate
Sure.
roughly the same amount of reserves.
Okay, I'll get that changed ahead of the next commission. meeting.
So just a closing comment here. Carl's going to be working through this model. This is not the end of it. As you saw in the schedule, it's going to get refined over the next period of time. And as we go for credit worthiness and so on, we're going to be relying on the model a lot. So this is just the start of the process.
And I'll be clear, I'm not doing the modeling, my team, the CDM Smith team is, so
Yeah,
I'll give credit where credit's due there. But no, we are happy to continue to work with yourselves and your HNTV team. It's been a great partnership, I think, in making sure that we are sharing information well and being conscious of each other's needs. Even if we, at some point, take slightly different directions, it's a matter of being conscious and aware of what we need from this process and how we can provide that. So appreciate everyone's cooperation on that.
thanks,
And Carl, I just will say from the HNTV team that's serving the port, I can't speak highly enough of you and your team, CDM Smith and others, and your partnership on this. As you can see, every single number that's on that page has been vetted and worked through with the Bi-State Working Group. And that is just a symbol that we are all working towards the same goal, and that is to get a bridge.
And yeah, thank you both. And I would say, I don't know, Commissioner, if you want to talk any about what we've heard from the state legislatures about the importance of a toll increase and what they're looking at. in
Yeah,
order to
it
provide
is.
State funding.
We're hearing it from both states and the feds. It's super, super important to show them that the locals are coming together with participation, and this is the major piece of it.
Mhm.
So the quicker we can get this behind us and getting the reserve going, the better the story we're gonna have as we're trying to get money released from Washington this year and get money appropriated out of Oregon, and then going for grants later this year on the feds. It's,
Yeah.
I can't stress enough, we gotta have this. Or it's not gonna work.
Right. I mean, that TIFIA loan becomes a line of credit, right? And I think we've said that before, you only use what you need. So the more we can get from everybody else, the lower those numbers are, so.
Makes sense. We're looking for that recommendation, I guess, pretty soon.
Yep.
All right. Carl, Carrie, thank you both for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, the executive director's report was in your packet. Did you have anything, Debbie, you wanted to note in there, or does anybody, okay, email Kevin if you had any questions on that one. Commissioner Garing, did you have anything on urban renewal that you wanted to mention this evening?
No, I don't have anything.
We don't have any action items this evening. Commissioner Strike, anything?
No.
Commissioner Fox? Nope, nothing for me, nothing for me. The one directive to staff that I remember is the financial model and looking into that. Was there anything else that I did not write down? Okay. Then with that, we can recess regular session and enter into executive session under ORS 192-6602E to conduct deliberations with persons designated to negotiate real property transactions, not other. And ORS 192-6602H to consult with legal counsel regarding current litigation or litigation likely to be filed, and ORS 192-6602F to consider information or records that are exempt from disclosure by law, including written advice from legal counsel.
I felt that way too.
Chris,